Previously on Nerd Punches Nerd.
The show didn't really have much good drama. There were some good episodes, I'll grant. But it wasn't... there were a lot of dumb episodes, too. And I feel like a lot of the episodes were dumb. And the show never really went anywhere with the characters. They didn't really have any good character interactions. Some of the characters individually I like. You know, I like Janeway, I like Chakotay, I like Tom Paris, I like Harry Kim. You know, I like a lot of the characters. But I don't think that their interactions were so interesting. Neelix was annoying as hell. I hate Neelix. I want him to die. He wasn't funny at all. He's the Jar Jar Binks of Voyager.
Hello, and welcome to Nerd Punches Nerd, the only podcast where a bunch of nerds pretend to physically fight over minor pop culture minutiae. I'm Jeremy here with Benji and with a very special guest, Sam. And I hear
Sam!
Sam,
Oh!
I hear
I didn't know this was gonna happen.
I hear you also have a guest.
Yes, I not only am I a very special guest, but I have brought a very special guest with me, and she is my wife, Meira.
Hi.
Say hi, Meira.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Welcome to the podcast that I am the guest of.
I mean, like, it's been kind of empty without you. I'm not gonna lie, you know. So it's good to hear your voice. Good to have you around. You know, it's just I've been asking Jeremy, like, when is Sam gonna come back to the, you know, make a little guest appearance on the podcast? And Jeremy's like, soon enough, Benji, soon enough.
Now,
Digitally pats my head.
I have gotten at least one request from somebody, basically our podcast #1 fan, if we're to do a Star Wars podcast. But I believe I'm the only one to have seen it.
Oh,
now,
you're saying for the latest Star Wars movie?
Yeah. Now,
Yes.
I will tell you,
Meira and I have not seen it yet.
It's supposed to be on Disney Plus tomorrow, which is May the 4th, etc. Because May the 4th be with you, and so on. It's Star Wars Day. And, you know, we could talk about it there. I mean, I saw it, you know, I went to see it. I went to, you know, wrote a review. I took our friend Daniel to go, and it was kind of disappointing. But, you know, it was just interesting because last year I really loved Endgame, and as sort of like the culmination of things. And the Star Wars as culmination, not so much. But so we're going to be doing instead a different sci-fi universe today, which is Star Trek. And the subject of our podcast will be Star Trek Voyager. So welcome everyone to the Star Trek Voyage cast. And
should we do the song? Is that Voyager?
No, that's Next Generation.
There you go.
Well, do you remember how it goes? Because Deep Space Nine is like dum dum do 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 like that.
Deep Space Nine's theme is very boring.
Well, it's broody, it's introspective, you know, that kind of thing.
Boring.
You know, the
That's right.
That's right. And the
I just
theme.
have to tell you, when I was pregnant with our daughter. Okay.
We should have that as the intro song to this episode. Just play that at the beginning. Mira singing that.
Maybe.
We had it memorized, and we inculcated our child with it because when she was in the womb, we watched Voyager every single night.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so it's sort of a lullaby. You can turn it into
You gotta start young.
Yes.
Right.
Have the Pavlovian response.
Right. So, yeah, the theme of the original one is classic sci-fi, you know, stuff, and then Enterprise was a terrible pop song, and then I believe after that was Discovery, which is a takeoff of it's a mutation of the original series theme, and then there's Picard, which is a takeoff on Next Generation theme. So.
And I'm going to posit something without having seen every single thing after Voyager. I'm going to posit something that, of course, I can be proven wrong from, but I still kind of feel confidently about this. I feel like Voyager was the last Star Trek thing that was worthwhile.
I don't know about that.
The last Star Trek theme or
thing.
Of any installment of it, totally. However, this comes from me not seeing basically any of Enterprise, none of Discovery, none of Picard, and like two of the movies that came afterwards. I don't know. I just
There are some episodes of.
It makes me so happy that you say that, because I love Voyager and it's my favorite Star Trek by far. But Picard is interesting. I do think Voyager is much better, but.
Well, I have seen more Star Trek than any of you, but that also includes not good Star Trek too. I've seen, not all the movies, but all the new ones, the J.J. Abrams, plus the newest one that he didn't do, but it was terrible. They're all pretty bad.
Did you like Discover? Is it Discover or Discovery?
Discovery. And did I like it? I thought it was okay. And it was one of these things where
my opinion,
the pilot of Discovery is garbage.
It is. We stopped after
we watched the pilot and we just didn't want to see any more after that.
But I will say every other episode is better than that one. And it goes up and down over the course of the show. And there are definitely characters I like and characters I do not like. But there are, it's one of those things where it's like it gets a little, up its own, arse, as they say. I think Picard suffers from that a little bit too. I feel like it gets like the final episode. I was like, there's like one really. I don't know. Have you seen all of Picard?
Yes. We saw all of the first season of Picard.
So, without spoiling it, the last episode has like a very touching moment that is completely then screwed over, like right away, and it's kind of infuriating. So it's like, I know that it's sort of annoying because it's like I know you're capable of so much better than what you're actually doing, and that's what's annoying because like Michael Chabon and other people behind it, it's just that also Kiwa Goldsman is still there, and no offense to him, but he's terrible and he's never been a good writer. Don't forget Batman and Robin. He won an Oscar for A Beautiful Mind.
Oh really?
But I would call that a fluke, and also it wasn't a good movie. But it's just one of those. It's just one of these things where he has been involved with Star Trek for a while, unfortunately. So he isn't
but
like
not,
the main.
Not Voyager, right?
No. He wasn't involved with Voyager. But one of the things.
Enough about Discovery and Picard. Right. Let's talk about Voyager.
So the interesting thing.
I want to sort of set the frame of also why I think it might be good to talk about Voyager, but.
Well, there is a history of Voyager, and then there's a history of Voyager with us. And the history with us is that for a while, I was the only one who had seen all of it, and then for a little while, I was the only one who defended it among us. When we had our classic Defend It episode about 4 or so years ago, one of them was Sam arguing in disfavor of Voyager and me, who was defending it. And I wasn't saying it as my favorite.
So this goes back to Nerd Punch's Nerd History, Nerd versus Lore.
Yeah.
It's almost as controversial as the Lost podcast. Who knows where that went? I don't even know what we talked about. But
I know. I don't remember what we talked about in the last podcast either. That's just here, just to clue you in. Our second podcast ever. There was some problem with the audio and it like didn't get recorded, so like it was just lost to, the internet.
Anyway, I think we talked about the Avengers.
On that one, Sam admitted that he loved Voyager, but he was embarrassed that he loved it, and so conveniently it got lost.
I think
The history of Voyager on this podcast is a while back. I said that I didn't like Voyager, and I explained why, and Jeremy defended it, and he explained why he thought it was good. And since then, I rewatched Voyager, and now I'm like totally in the tank for Voyager. Yay. And I think it's great. I think it's my favorite Star Trek series. Like I've completely flipped 180 degrees.
But you must have flipped before you showed it to me,
no?
Because so can I just give my background here for a second?
Yes, please.
I grew up not having seen any Star Trek. I was like, my family was completely Star Wars family. Not that you have to be one or the other, but just, I never watched any Star Trek. And when we were married, Sam was like, I have to introduce you to Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, the show we should start with is Voyager because you're gonna like it the best. And I loved Voyager so much that it slightly ruined a lot of other Star Trek for me. Although I still appreciate, TNG and DS9. But how would you had you flipped before you showed it to me? Because you were so enthusiastic when you
Because even though I kind of thought it was bad, I still thought that you would like it the best.
Yeah.
Just
well, you
because
were
of
right.
for aesthetic reasons. But the more I watch it, the more I was like, I really like this show.
It really it ages really well.
Well, I will tell you, it's interesting because you're kind of in the minority about that. Most people, other than the newest stuff, find Voyager to be subpar, and a lot of people really are against it. Now, it's also, you have to keep in mind, there are very strident people who hate a lot of aspects of it, and specifically Janeway has been someone who has been hated since the show came out.
Yeah,
so
can you explain to me why? Because I got into like a few Facebook discussions about this with some very intense Star Trek fans.
Well, I think there are reasonable arguments and unreasonable ones.
Yeah, because the only arguments that I heard were she shouldn't have stranded them in the Delta Quadrant, which I'm just like, okay. I mean, that's the premise of the show, is guys. Like,
well,
I don't know what to tell you. And also, like, she's a woman, and I'm like, I also don't know.
I think that's probably what it was to begin with. I mean, it might have been some other stuff, like you were saying, like Delta Quadrant, and like, and also like, and this is why I like the show. But it's like she was like she was like a version of Picard in a way. I feel like, and so I think maybe and Picard is like it's a sacred character. So I mean, I feel like Janeway thought this was a lesser version, and DS9, like Cisco, like sort of, but again, since it's stationary, like Voyager really kind of is an extension of Next Generation sort of stuff.
Yes, and in fact, that was entirely the point. It was meant to be the new flagship, no pun intended, of the Star Trek, canon. Like they had don't forget, Deep Space Nine and Voyager were on at the same time. It was kind of like staggered. As TNG was ending in its final season, the first season of DS9 happened, and they had a little crossover where Picard kind of came on. It was all about like the Borg attack was sort of the setup for Deep Space Nine, and then after TNG ended, a little while after that is when Voyager started, so that DS9 had already begun.
It wasn't a little while after. It was like the next year.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't.
Yeah, it was like, DS9 started like towards the end of Next Generation, and then like immediately as soon as Next Generation ended, Voyager started.
So Voyager also had the better ratings between Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So for a while, more people were watching Voyager, but there were people who were much harder fans of Deep Space Nine, partially because it wasn't watched as much. So like people who were much more like proud of like saying I'm watching this thing, and I think part of it is because it had like these like it had very like strong fans. It felt like they're really trying to do interesting things with the continuity and everything. And I could say that there are things about Voyager that are more annoying to me or not, but we can get into a little bit that later. But I will say, for me with Janeway, that the things that I like about her character are mainly about personal interactions with people, and the things I dislike are about commanded decisions that she makes. And a lot of the times I feel like when I was watching these episodes, it's like, I don't really like how, I felt like, I didn't like that decision. It felt like it was kind of cruel, or didn't have as much empathy. Whereas like when she was actually dealing with people, that was much more interesting to me. Then it felt more like a real person. And I think part of the thing that you might say, well, is it unfair? Like, is it she was a guy doing the same things, and I don't think I would think so. I mean, definitely, I feel for me, it wouldn't make it a difference, because I felt like Archer, for example, from Enterprise was much worse. His decision, he wasn't good command wise, and he wasn't good at interpersonal stuff either. So he was like kind of failing on everything. So for me,
later in the discussion, I'd love to hear examples of that, because like I think she made really good command decisions, and I think most of her command decisions were like specifically stemming from almost excess empathy, which is what a lot of the people who argued with me on Facebook were kind of pointing to. They were like, screw the Ocampa, who cares about the Ocampa, like that kind of thing. And I was just like, this feels very
that wasn't an issue I had.
In line with,
these tended to be like particular episodes of things, because the truth is a lot of the episodes are like whatever.
We'll get into that, I think.
I think it's a good category maybe to start with, talking about the different characters. Specifically, that might be a good way to guide the conversation after our intro game.
After our little
so that's how we're going to start.
Round.
So we always like to start our episodes with a little bit of a hypothetical question of some sort. Now today's question, of course, is going to be about Voyager, which is this. If you could take any character on Voyager and exchange them with a character from a different Star Trek show, who would it be? And there are no restrictions on who you can pick, basically. So yes, you can pick one of the pigmen from the first Q episode, if you really want, that just like, they go and they just like, and they stabbed Worf, if you really want. I mean, it's a terrible choice, but you can pick it. So we're gonna start with
but
Mr.
You can't do Wesley. Is that his name? Wesley?
It is his name.
I think Wesley is banned, right?
No, Wesley is not banned. You can pick Wesley if you want. I don't have a problem with that. You just can't pick Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. He is not a Star Trek character. All right, so Benj, what is yours choice?
So I'd swap out Harry Kim and Tom Paris. I had to look up Tom Paris because I called him the other guy in my notes when I wrote this down. I mean,
who would you replace?
I'll say in a second, but while it's good to kind of have the human and the kind of bland humans and stuff, they kind of bothered me. I mean, I think Sam actually mentioned this back in the days when he didn't like Voyager, so maybe he loves Harry Kim right now. But like Harry Kim's thing, it was kind of irritating. I think the conceit of him like falling in love with like different like non-human creatures is potentially interesting. It's just like I don't know if the character was like done. I don't know. It bothered me some at times.
There were so many episodes that could be boiled down to like Harry Kim falls in love with the wrong woman.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Many.
Again, it's like
so many,
like,
too many.
That's not inherently. In fact, that's kind of an interesting sort of science fiction thing that works with Star Trek. But yeah, it was just that over and over.
It would be more interesting if like Harry Kim ever felt like he was actually driving the plot as opposed to being a victim of it.
Maybe, but hold on. And then with Tom Paris, again, he was just bland. And I mean, I didn't even realize. I guess spoiler alert, right? Isn't like his dad is like an admiral or something.
Yes.
That was kind of the
not
thing,
a spoiler. They talk about it in the pilot episode.
Right, but I didn't even know that, like, because he was so forgettable. So anyway, right. I'd like to. So I mean, at the risk of like taking away the two bland human characters, which sort of helps the storyline to some degree. Bringing in I bring in Data because Data interacting with 7 of 9, with Tuvok maybe, but with 7 of 9 I think would have been really interesting with the doctor, the simulation doctor.
Yeah, the EMH.
And then also seeing and then seeing maybe how Janeway would, because I feel like Janeway would be like a different sort of mentor to Data, so I feel like that would be an interesting thing. And then I would swap out also. I know I'd put in Odo from DS9. I put Odo / Quark, but probably Odo. I think Odo's like a little more interesting because Odo has a very fascinating personality. I mean, he was very like his backstory is interesting, and it's also a different. Star Trek seems to have this like theme of like kind of like what makes something human and how are they human and do they want to be human? What does it mean they want to be human? And I thought Odo had a good twist. Odo wasn't just the like this sort of Star Trek archetype of like non-human wanting to understand and feel human. It just Odo had like a different way of accessing it. And
he never wanted to be human, but there wasn't. He was like conflicted because he didn't know where he came from. He was like the only one of his kind. It was like he was so different as a a transformer. That a shapeshifter. That he was arguing with the solids around him.
And he had and I think also the acting was really good, but he had a very interesting personality. He was sort of understated. Like he sort of had that understated kind of, it wasn't robotic, but he had kind of a monotone-ish, I feel like, or it was like understated emotions, but like there was a good like subtlety, like there was a lot going on. And I feel like, I don't know if it was the last episode, but like, I guess spoiler alert for that, of DS9, like didn't he like explode into colors or something? Like something happened?
No, that is not what happened. No. What happens
we haven't finished DS9.
Sorry, never mind. I won't, then I'm not going to say. I will say he does not explode into a giant rainbow of colors.
Okay, I mean that happens.
He like turns into like his like natural form, right?
All right, you just said you're trying not to give spoilers.
I said spoilers beforehand.
No, this
I don't want to
podcast
give spoilers, but
will only be
Snape killed
spoiler.
Dumbledore.
Fine.
All right,
You
enough
can
of that.
bleep out my entire thing.
No, it's
except for
not.
when I talk about the rainbows.
It's because they haven't seen it yet. That's why you need to not say it. Anyway.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Now we've been spoiled on the
I
fact that Odo explodes into
a rainbow.
I think you're getting confused because there was an alternate episode, like where they go to a mirror universe, and there might have, maybe you're getting confused by that. All right, let's move on. So, Sam,
Yes.
what is your choice?
Okay, so I also thought about replacing Tom Paris because he's like kind of a boring character, and he's like kind of like the like annoying white guy that like the writers thought was an important character, but he really wasn't. Except I can't get rid of Tom Paris because of his romance with B'Elanna Torres, which like really is totally redeeming of his character throughout the show.
Not to mention their daughter.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, so that was one. I thought about getting rid of Kes, but the show actually replaced her, so like I feel like it's not necessary to kick her off the show. And I thought about getting rid of Neelix because he's the most annoying character, but I had to pick Kim because even though Kim is not as annoying as Neelix, he's so much more boring. So Benji, I'm with you on Kim being super boring. So Kim's off the show, and I decided to replace him with Raffi from Picard. Now, Benji, you haven't seen Picard, but the rest of us have, right? Jeremy's seen it, Mihara's seen it.
Yeah. Raffi's awesome.
She's a great character, and like one of the things about Voyager that's important to understand is that like Voyager is a crew of misfits. Like everybody on Voyager is somebody who's like basically kind of like, except for Janeway herself, someone who's kind of like failed at life or is like thrust into a position that they don't really belong, or maybe Tuvok you could say also. But the rest of them are all like people who are like out of place, don't really know what they're doing or why they're there. And I feel like Raffi also is like a total misfit, somebody whose life is kind of a mess, who really would be like well suited to joining the Voyager crew and like finding her place and her role, in that setting. So that's what I would do. That's my replacement choice.
All right. So, Mira, what about you?
Oh my god, that was such a good one. So, okay, this is really funny because the first person that I actually had, there were two characters I had in mind to swap out, and one of them was Kes, but like Sam said, the show already did that. The other was also Kim, and I just.
Oh my god, you guys are you're so racist. It's ridiculous.
I know. I just want to give a caveat here that it's
I
not.
just want to say that I know I'm kicking out an Asian guy, but I've replaced the Asian guy with a black woman.
Yes.
Oh my god, Sam, there aren't enough Asians on Star Trek.
That is true. That is true.
And you get rid of one of them.
Here's the thing. When I started replacing Kim, I feel bad about this, and I'm not even sure that I'm like positive. I'd rather replace no one. Like I'd rather just add because Kim. I feel like the character became boring, but it's like has nothing to do with the actor. I actually think
of course
the actor.
Not. Garrett Wang is a great guy, and he's certainly
amazing.
He's certainly
in the beginning,
a good actor.
I always like have this huge affection for Kim. Like I think there's like a role for kind of the straight character, like the character who just is kind of
the straight
man, and who's not like the wacky, like crazy. And like if I were on Voyager, I would be Kim. But I felt at a certain point in the show like the writers kind of didn't know what to do with him, or that they just got kind of bored.
What do we do with a competent person that doesn't really make normal mistakes?
Yeah, it was just like there weren't enough. I mean, they weren't doing anything interesting with him. Now they kind of did that with a number of characters towards the end that like kind of felt like they weren't really doing a ton with. I mean, I love Tom Paris, but I think his interest became at a certain point in his relationship with B'Elanna, which I found very beautiful, and like it was so rare. It's so rare in television to see a relationship depicted in kind of a healthy way like that I really appreciate that. But like even like amazing characters like Tuvok, at a certain point I felt like they weren't doing a ton with. Definitely Chakotay also.
Definitely.
But if any of them had to go, but just because the episodes that focus on Kim were the most boring episodes to me usually, unfortunately, like I guess if I had to kick someone off, it would be Kim, even though I think the actor is great. I think the character had a lot of potential that they didn't take in any direction. And it's funny, so to replace him with my two choices, the first choice was also Odo.
Okay.
Oh, nice. All right.
And not for any specific reason, except for like Benji, what you said about him. Like you had a lot of deep things that you said there that I agree with and that are great, but I just love him. I just think he's such a fascinating character. Like he's definitely the character in DS9 that I'm the most interested in. And I don't know if it's a combination of, I think, the character himself and also like how it's the stunning acting, but he's just so fascinating.
Yes, just passed away fairly recently. He was yes. So, R.I.P. Renee. He was great for sure.
He was amazing. I mean, now that Sam chose Raffi, like Raffi's also like awesome, and she's so scrappy, and she would fit in. But I think for the same reasons, Sam, that you said that Raffi would fit because of being a misfit, I think that applies for Odo too. The other choice I had, I know you guys are all going to disagree with, but it's more of like a rational kind of idea that like the whole time watching Voyager, I'm like, they could really use like a therapist. Like, meaning this is such a traumatic thing that has happened to all of them. So like maybe I would replace Kim with Troy just from the perspective of like having a ship's counselor on.
Yeah. I was thinking about doing something with Troy.
They are really. I need to, like, it's good you brought that up, Mira, because I think you brought up, was it you or Sam who brought up how they're all misfits? Is that you said that?
Sam.
And how come there's only a therapist on one show? I mean, how come it's not like a standard thing? It's like, oh, it's a great idea, except they almost did nothing with Troy's character. It was she was wildly underutilized.
I know that would be my only hesitation. I feel like they utilized her more in the one episode of Picard than they did in all of TNG.
Well, I don't know, that's part of the thing.
She's in a Picard episode?
It's just one episode, yeah.
I don't know if that's a spoiler, but like
sort of, but no, I don't. As long as you don't say anything about it, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like she was really underutilized in TNG.
You're so right. Like Voyager needed a therapist more than any other ship. In fact, in my personal headcanon, part of the reason for like a lot of the irrational things that the crew of Voyager does is that they're all like a little bit crazy from the situation that they're in,
they're going through
which
trauma.
Would make anyone crazy. But they're like just a little bit like not quite totally, there. And that really explains a lot of the decision making that goes on that show. So I think it works. But yes, 100%. They need a therapist.
Well, I had I guess I will go now. Now, initially I thought, well, what if I just switched, everyone other than Cisco and Kira with like Janeway and Seven, but then it's like, well, I have to keep the EMH. It's like, well, no, and then it's like, all right, this is too much. So here are my two choices. One, I would exchange one couple. The couple is Neelix and Kes because I don't like either of them, and I don't think either of them was utilized well. And I would switch them with my favorite dysfunctional couple, which is the O'Briens from Deep Space Nine, which is which is two people, and Miles, who's the Irish guy, and Keiko, who's the Japanese botanist. And to me, that's she was interested in like xenobiology and stuff, and he's like an engineering guy. I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. Plus, they have their own kids. I just like them, and I think they're they have like real issues as a couple, like trying to actually deal with different things. The other thing I would potentially do is I would change Paris, and I would replace Paris with Jadzia from Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't prevent Torres from having a relationship with her either, because Jadzia, if you may remember, has had the minds of both men and women, and it is canonically known that she is able to have attraction to people of both genders.
Sure.
Because there's actually an episode about that. Yeah.
This is Dax.
Yeah. I think Dax was a really interesting character, and I would much prefer her over Paris.
She got married to Worf?
She did get married to Worf, and that was like a nice relationship too, but I just we're talking about switching people. That's what I would say. So it's interesting.
What's interesting to me is nobody picked Chakotay.
I thought
Chakotay-
about it.
Yeah.
And
I
like,
like Chakotay. I've always liked Chakotay, actually.
I like
I mean,
Chakotay a lot.
Chakotay, in some way, it's funny because he's like, in some ways, like a lot like Riker, but like a little bit like sweeter and softer than Riker. But he's also kind of boring.
I'd rather they
I think
just
at the
use
beginning of the show he was more
better,
interesting.
yeah.
At a certain
Yeah.
point, it seems
Yeah,
like they
it's true.
lost an idea of what to do with him other than as a romance for Seven.
Well, that was like way at the end.
Yeah, but after Seven came onto the show, it felt like there was like a shift towards a lot more focus on developing like Seven's character and the Doctor, which was very interesting. But you were seeing like a little less emphasis on Chakotay and Tuvok and definitely Kim.
Yeah, the original gang.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. What's kind of
And it was still good,
Yeah.
but like it did feel like I don't feel like any of the characters were really boring. It just felt like sometimes they weren't given as much to do.
Well, I really did not like Chakotay and Seven ending up together. I felt
really?
like I didn't buy it at all, and I
It felt kind of
I bought
awesome.
Seven's relationship immediately, in Picard much more than I ever
Yes.
did, and that was almost nothing than I ever did
Yes.
with Chakotay. I felt like that was like shoehorned in. Is like, let's just have her in a relationship, and I thought, and I was surprised. I remember when it happened, and I was like, this came out of nowhere, and I do not like it.
Yeah, I felt the same way too. And I really like that in Picard they made her relationships with other women because that felt very accurate to me.
Yeah, especially because, I was making this point to someone else recently. That, Seven didn't go through puberty. She was
Right.
assimilated as a child.
Yeah.
So
Right.
she might not really have a great sense of what her sexuality even is.
Right.
And maybe it takes some time for her to really be able to figure that out. Or maybe it's more like a pansexuality thing, or maybe she's just gay. Who knows?
Yeah.
But at the I didn't, all we know is like she was curious about it because why not? But that's really all we saw until it was like, yes, of course I'm in love with you, Chakotay. Obviously, I always have been. Or something.
It does. I don't know. It didn't bother me quite as much as I guess it bothered the two of you, but I agree that it kind of came out of nowhere.
So
yeah.
So maybe I think talking about this, maybe one way we can talk about this, and tell me what you all think about this. Maybe what we can talk about is like, as I was saying before, we talk about each of the characters and sort of talk about I don't know, parallels with the earlier characters, or like how it's compared with the rest of Star Trek characters or storylines, or maybe the tropes of Star Trek. Like meaning like as we were talking about earlier, like I feel like Janeway, what's interesting, what some people don't like, is like Janeway's kind of like a sort of spiritual sequel to the character of Picard. There's a little difference, so maybe like we can look at some of the different characters of Voyager and like how we think they stack up with the other characters in Star Trek.
Okay, well, I think, we can start, continuing, like, talking about Janeway, and I think it's interesting because there were definitely a lot of, issues that people had at the time with her, like we said, and part of that was coming from, like, a sexist place for sure, and I was recently reading this fan fiction about this guy who was, like, a self-insert on Star Trek Voyager, and he just hated Janeway so much, and she is portrayed in the course of the story to be essentially a sociopath.
Right.
And I would
She's
say
really not like.
Well, but again, you have to keep in mind, like, there are people who've gotten these ideas. There are people who, there's one of these reviewers called SF Debris who, he was once associated with the Channel Awesome people and the Blip TV stuff, and he's like, I would say he doesn't hate Janeway, but he has like sort of, funny reviews of Star Trek episode, and he's often like talked about like how, Janeway is sort of like, it's like, doesn't really, is like not having empathy. And I think that kind of idea is fairly pervasive among the fan community. The idea that when it comes down to it, that, Janeway doesn't seem to really care about her crew. I would say that's a common opinion that I've seen.
I do not agree with that.
That seems like
all.
the opposite of what happens in the show.
That she's like unnecessarily risks people's safety and lives.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, I really disagree with that. That feels like
First of
a
all,
180.
like, I mean, where do I even start with that? Like, on the original Star Trek, Kirk used to put people in danger constantly, right? That's number one. Number two, on The Next Generation, the Enterprise had like families on board. There were like civilians and children.
Yeah. Right. Voyager
and like
is
they were
a
constantly put
ship.
in danger.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the idea that Janeway like was not like empathetic to like, you know, oh, what might happen to her crew, like she's constantly worrying about it, like every episode practically. Like it's crazy to me that people would think that.
Well, there's only one episode that I can think of off the top of my head that has stuck with me as something where I really did not like what she did, and that was Tuvix.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's actually two episodes that I feel that way about. One is Tuvix, and the other one is when, you know, right after they like take Seven of Nine on board, and Janeway basically like kidnaps Seven of Nine, who like is asking to be returned back to the Borg, and Janeway refuses to return her to the Borg and basically holds her in confinement against her will. Which, like, you know, I mean, you could kind of debate that. Like, I've heard people suggest, like, well, it's like somebody who was, like, in a cult, and, like, you know, they've been brainwashed, and you have to, like, deprogram them.
But also, just to play devil's advocate here for a second, her holding on to 7 of 9, correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory of it is that it wasn't her decision. I don't think at the time was from a desire to like save 7. It was to save the ship. It was because returning 7 would have put the ship in danger, wasn't it?
I don't think so. I think she could have returned 7 afterwards, and it wouldn't have put the ship in danger. But it was because 7 was human.
Right.
She knew that 7 was human, and like, you know, and had like it was like personal to her.
Right.
But it does seem to me like kind of disrespectful of 7's rights as a person to choose to return to the Borg.
But it's still the opposite.
But putting that aside, let's
you can compare that to
talk about Tuvix,
the Hugh episode.
Really interesting.
Wait, hold on. Before we talk about Tuvix, can we just say that I think like Benji and Sam and I all had the same gut reaction to what you were describing, Jeremy, which is like, I mean, my impression just from like a very basic, like obvious watching of the episodes is that Janeway, episode after episode, she is putting her own life in the line to protect her you know, her crew. She's such like a mother figure to the crew, which I actually think works really well. That this show of all the Star Trek shows has, I mean, like, not that it's the only one, but I mean the fact that it has a female captain and the ship is stuck out in the Delta Quadrant, like she needs to be, like, you see that moment in the beginning in season 1 where she realizes that she can't just be a captain in the way even that Picard or other people have been captain. Like, you see her realize that the crew needs something more than that. Like, they need family. And she is so, like, nurturing, and she develops such personal relationships with all of them. And there are just so many episodes where she puts her own life on the line instead of everyone else. Like, she's constantly trying to protect them. I'm baffled that anyone can see a different reading in there.
I think people were probably just dealing. I think a lot of people it was pretty soon. It was soon enough after TNG that like people were comparing, and I feel like it's like it is one of those things of like, oh, like, this is nothing compared to Picard or blah blah blah. I feel like that has to do with it. But yeah, no, I agree with you. And I mean, I'm remembering an episode. I forgot what it was. I think the guy was the term. Well, I don't know if it's red shirt because I don't think he died. Maybe he did. There's that episode where there's that guy who just keeps to himself. There's like this whole thing of this guy who keeps to himself and doesn't eat with anyone else. You know, like, just there for, I think for one episode, and she like went and like spoke and like talked to him. Yeah, because I just kept thinking about that as you were saying it. That's kind of the thing that she does. Like, she's always like checking in with everyone there. And she does have a little bit of like the steely demeanor, but kind of appropriate for the term. And also, she is she's a military officer. So it's like I think the show strikes a really good balance with, you know, the kind of overlying like sort of like military. I feel like that comes from Gene Roddenberry, which is fine. It's part of the show, but the kind of military structure, hierarchy, ethos is like in there, and that's who Janeway is. but she's still like, but she's a different character in a different situation who has to adapt to this. And I think you sometimes see her chafing against it. Like she's very kind of like, I feel like she is a very sort of I don't want to say rote, but I feel like she's the type of person who like she probably like got like amazing scores on exams and listens to a lot of authority, and is like very much you could say a military archetype. But she had to adapt to the situation, and that's more of her challenge. And I think she does it really well.
Well, we know that's true because she's like she's a nerd. She's like she was on, like she wasn't really groomed for command. She was a science person.
That's kind of the same character arc that Picard goes through, but I feel like for Janeway it's a little bit smoother for her to like slip into that more nurturing role, whereas like Picard, like it was really not natural for him to do that, and like that's like sort of his growth throughout the entire series,
right?
Like to learn how to be that more like nurturing, paternal figure.
Yes, that's why the last scene of Star Trek Next Generation is so great, because it's sort of like it's the realization of Picard where he's like, yeah, I mean, I can't believe.
Before you spoil it, Jeremy, you should know Mira has not seen that. Yeah,
we're still in the middle of both Picard of both us.
Yeah, Jeremy, you should. Yeah, don't spoil a lot because the.
I didn't. That's fine. I didn't say very much more than whatever.
I'm just saying, like, just be careful.
But anyway, I agree with what you guys are saying about Picard, but also Benji, I very much agree with what you were saying. It sounded, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were kind of talking about how Janeway, she's very much like a rule follower, and you see her kind of struggle. Putting aside the question of the nurturing thing, I think you're touching this, Benji, that like she runs up against like the limits of the prime, is it the prime directive, or that she
yes,
she's so true, she's so loyal and true to Federation and Starfleet like ideals. And she tries to hold true to that, but she does also kind of have to learn when it's okay to break the rules. Is that what you were kind of talking about, Benji?
Yeah, no, that's a good way of saying it. And like I was sort of thinking aloud, but I'm just remembering because it's been years since I've watched it. I'm remembering, or at least a lot of it. I'm remembering that I feel like that was kind of, and I guess this is what was impressive about the show. I feel like that was like the subtext of it, and like I kind of felt it. It wasn't like her going like all the time like, oh, I can't believe I have to violate the prime directive, anything like that.
Right.
Like, it wasn't on the nose. Like you could see she sort of, like her personality is sort of chafed against the, just the reality of just them being out there, and how her personality was a sort of like stolid, sort of stiff, in a way person, but again, she does really well. And in fact, maybe it is that mixture that helped her sort of take care of the crew, because she kept some like order, she kept some stability, she still acted like a captain, but she also like needed to adapt to what was going on. I mean, one episode I remember that really struck me, and I agree with what you're saying about Neelix. And I've always said Neelix is annoying, but he does sort of serve a purpose sometimes. It does kind of make sense to have him. And I remember they go through this one section where there are no stars, so it's complete emptiness, like black emptiness, and like Neelix is freaking out. And I don't even remember what Janeway says there, but I don't remember her herself totally freaking out or anything like that. So I think that sort of is like a testament to her. So yeah, I mean, I think.
Yeah. Well, great. Okay, so maybe this will help explain something. Have you guys seen the movie Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire?
The movie of it?
Yes, the movie.
I have.
I'm just kidding.
I know you have, Benj.
I don't remember that much
about it. There's a classic meme
except for like that like moment at the ball where like Hermione is like, "You ruined everything," or whatever she says. That's like all I remembered from that movie.
Well, in fairness, he did, but that's not what I'm talking about. There's a great meme from the movie, which is a counter example, because in the book, when Harry's name gets selected from the Goblet of Fire, there's a line that says, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? Dumbledore asked calmly, is the line in the book. And then in the movie, he rushes over, shakes him, and says, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? Now, what is this? It's a metaphor for how Janeway is in the show and how people see her.
Yes. Right, yes. Oh my God.
Yes.
It's so true. Because just one last thing before we move on, probably, but Benji, what you were saying about like how she has to learn how to break the rules and stuff. Like, I think it's notable, and this goes back to your comment, Jeremy. It's notable that the episodes that she struggles the most with, like, does she hold up her ethics, or does she, break them or ignore them? It's always in order to save the lives of the crew. It's never for herself. It's like she has such compassion and she cares so much about her crew that, for her, the most unquestionable line of like not crossing, not betraying your own morals and your own ethics, like the only time that she would consider doing that is really for the sake of the crew. Sorry, there's like background noise here.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's true. Should we maybe talk? I wonder what you all think is important. Like, we were starting to talk about Chakotay.
Right. Well,
like,
Sam was going to say
Riker
about Tuvix. So,
Yeah,
Sam.
okay, so first of all, Benji, do you remember the Tuvix episode?
I'm looking up the summary now, but why don't you tell me the synopsis?
Okay, I'll just like summarize it real quick. So basically, there's a transporter accident, and Tuvok and Neelix are combined into one person, who is like essentially like a new character who has like some characteristics of Tuvok and some characteristics of Neelix, and essentially identifies as like an entirely separate individual. And so like most of the episode is just about like the weirdness of it and like him sort of like relating to people in a different way than Tuvok did, but a different way than Neelix did, and and like the crew kind of like trying to relate to him. But at the end, Janeway decides that she needs to undo Tuvix and bring back Tuvok and Neelix as two separate individuals. And it's a very controversial thing that she does. Like, the Doctor refuses to go along with it. The Doctor basically says, like, this is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath because you're asking me to essentially murder someone. But Janeway says, like, I need Tuvok. I can't, like, go on without Tuvok, and there's, like, two people who have died, and, like, I'm willing to, like, essentially kill one person to bring back those two people. And it's probably, like, the most morally questionable thing that Janeway does in the entire show. Because she essentially does decide to kill somebody who is an individual who exists, who identifies as a person, and basically says straight out, like, I don't want to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, but that I will say is like sort of like zooming out point. Just looking at the entire like Star Trek in context. I mean, that's one of those things I think that just makes when Star Trek is at its best, or at least part of what makes Star Trek, which I feel like the later stuff misses, which is these real questions. Because TNG and I think DS9 did too, but definitely TNG had these moments of like, oh, here's a morally questionable thing, or some horrible stuff does happen. Actually, I think it was the first Borg episode, ever, in TNG, and I don't think it's Picard doing anything, but someone does. Oh wait, hold on. Spoiler. Have you guys gotten to the first Q episode? Not the very first Q episode, the first Borg episode in TNG.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're like in the middle.
We're like in the middle of the show, yeah.
I guess like spoiler or whatever, but I just remember thinking from that episode like oh, that's messed up, that happened or something. Like that is part of the thing, and I mean I feel like that's what makes Star Trek, and even the case we can't say 100% Janeway is like 100% great, But I think that's good to have that sort of like that sort of like questioning right there. That's the whole thing of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing about it. They could have let Janeway off the hook, right? They could have been like, Tuvix could have been like, yes, you can kill me. I volunteer as tribute. Like split me back into the two people. Or they could have been like, oh, you're like medically not stable. Like you're gonna die if we don't like switch you back. But they basically they refused to take the cop out. They were like, no, like there's no medical issue. He's fine. He wants to live. He's telling them he wants to live, and he's putting the decision in Janeway's hands, and she's got to make the decision. So I really like, but the way that it plays out, really, it seems like she decided something that seems to be like just like morally the wrong choice.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Jeremy,
Yeah,
I know you
but
have a
here's
lot of things to say about this episode. So
right,
please
because
go ahead.
here's my real issue with it, and unfortunately, this is an issue that isn't entirely Voyager's fault, which is repercussions. And it's one thing to say she makes this decision because that's just something that happens sometimes. You know, she makes a call and maybe it's not a good one. The real problem is this is not something that really ever comes up again. You know, they don't have anything later where, you know, Tuvok or Neelix talk about it. They don't have anything else where anyone other characters like, you know, there is I can't, you know, can't we talk about something that's happened? You know, why doesn't the idea of Tuvix, like, why, you know, maybe, you know, there's, if you remember, there's things that where the EMH has these like fake movies and stuff. You know, maybe he comes
Right.
up in one of those. The idea is like it's never addressed, and there are similar issues, and part of this is down to the network really wanting to have resets. And it's one thing to have sort of an ongoing little romance thing because it's like that's incremental and it's not a huge deal. But they were worried that because it was in the days before TiVo, that if you just turn on an episode, you wouldn't understand what was happening. You know, so you can't just like build on things. And
You know, can I talk about that a little more generally, not having to do with Tuvix specifically? Because like a lot of the things that people complain about Voyager are they're like, oh, at the end of every episode they push the reset button and like there's no continuity from episode to episode and like it really should have had like much more continuity. And like on the one hand, yes, that's true, but on the other hand, that's what Star Trek was in that era. Deep Space Nine got away with some stuff a little bit, but like mostly
it got away with
was,
it because the network wasn't paying
because the
attention.
network wasn't paying as close attention as they were to Voyager. And like the same people who complain about Voyager pressing the reset button don't say a word about TNG, which pushed the reset button so much harder than Voyager ever did.
Remember that
well, I
episode
don't
when Geordi
know
is
that's
like brainwashed by the Romulans, and then like the next episode he's totally fine back to which is because
Geordi is brainwashed to become an assassin in one episode. And like literally, like he almost kills somebody because he was brainwashed by the Romulans after he was kidnapped. And it never, the next episode he's totally fine.
Not even a passing
never comes
remark
up again.
to counseling
Nothing.
with Troy. Nothing.
Zero mention of it.
And Voyager, compared to that, Voyager actually had a surprising amount of like.
There was some continuity. It would be wrong to say there was none.
It wasn't even just romance. Like, it was like the evolution of Seven's character, the evolution of the Doctor's character.
Even aside from that, B'Elanna, when
character.
B'Elanna finds out about all the Maquis being killed, that happens like episodes before, and then however many episodes later, it's not like immediately the next episode. They let it like simmer for a little bit, and then a bunch of episodes later, you see when she's trying to she's not trying to commit suicide, but she's like putting herself in severely life-risking situations. And it was later, and it's been festering that whole time. It's so realistic. They have things that keep coming back.
There are subtle things, like even in like the second season, which a lot of people hate, like there was this ongoing plot about like there was a traitor on board who was like leaking information.
They built that in so well.
Then the episode where Tom Paris like leaves the ship, they had built up to that with a whole bunch of episodes where like he was becoming more and more insubordinate, like to the point where like when I was watching like binge watching, like I was like, wow, Paris is like really like what's up with him? He's like late all the time, he's being rude to everybody. And it was like the next episode or 2 episodes later that they were like, oh, Paris is leaving the ship, and it was all a setup. It was all fake.
What's her name?
You know, to get Seska. It was like this plot that they had hatched to like reveal the
But
the
they
traitor.
didn't tell Chakotay because they didn't think he could act well enough.
Because they didn't think Chakotay was a good enough actor to keep his secret.
He was so angry when he finds out that like Janeway and Tuvok, right?
Anyway, the point is like they did have continuity. They did have these things that were like building from episode to episode and from season to season that people don't acknowledge. And meanwhile, like, nobody ever says a bad word about The Next Generation for being, like, so much worse at the same thing.
Well, first of all, okay, all right, hold on. A, you're wrong. People definitely complain about the lack of continuity in Star Trek Next Generation now.
But I'm saying the people who like The Next Generation and don't like Voyager, and they'll bring that up as a reason why they don't like Voyager, which is absurd because they're the same people who like The Next Generation.
Yeah, but see, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the problem that they couldn't help. And one of the issues that I have with it is the way they were able to do some continuity but not others is kind of frustrating to me. Because of like what you're saying, you just gave a bunch of examples. So how come they couldn't do that more consistently? Now I understand to be like, all right, in the Year of Hell, they can't they didn't want to like completely change the crew. They didn't want to kill people off in the same way. They didn't want to have like a messed up thing. But I felt like there were all these little pieces where they could make references to things and have stuff that comes up, and it just wasn't as consistent as I wanted. It's one thing to be like saying I don't understand the Chakotay 7 thing because I didn't like it, but they could have done more with that. They could have done more with a lot of these things. That's one of the problems that I had.
So they could have, on the one hand, you can say they could have done more, and on the other hand, you can say, like, they did as much as they could get away with, like, Rick Berman, like, monitoring everything and, like, nixing every idea. Like,
Well, yeah,
I read
unfortunately,
Oral History,
Rick, he was pretty bad.
About how they wanted to do, like, things that were, like, season-long story arcs or whatever, and, like, the most that Berman would allow them to get away with was, like, 2-part episodes. Like, that was it. He was like, you can do 2-part episodes, nothing more than that. And, like, they wanted to, but, like, he wouldn't let them. So, like, I mean, how much can you say, like, oh, Voyager sucks, like, because Rick Berman wouldn't let them do continuity? Like, Rick Berman was in charge of Star Trek throughout the 90s. Like, it was his thing.
Right,
once Gene Roddenberry died.
All right. I think we can move on here a little bit. So,
Rick Berman sucks, is the point.
Yes, he was responsible for Terry Farrell getting, quitting, essentially.
For who?
Terry Farrell, Dax on Deep Space Nine.
On Deep Space
Nine.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a suggestion, and again, I don't know, Jeremy, if you're about to go with something. Maybe we talk about the Seven Divide and Tuvok maybe to a degree, because Star Trek usually has 1 or 2 characters, I guess, starting with Spock, where it's like the one who's like detached from like emotion, so to speak, and like has to sort of learn.
Right.
And obviously, Data fill that role.
Tuvok is literally another Vulcan, and
right.
he's
but they didn't harp on that as much. Yeah.
Right, and he has a completely different kind of situation and arc. I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with me. I think Seven's arc is the most interesting of any character on the show. But that's my feeling, that her engagements with other characters, like how she and other people, are influencing each other. I think that's the most interesting to me. There are other ones. I mean, I definitely like what happens with like EMH stuff. I like his whole arc too. I just think like and it is an interesting one. I do like there was some interesting ideas about like peoplehood and everything. I just really feel like they pulled off Sevens a little bit better, because often with the EMH it felt like it was getting a little bit more into the kind of comedy area more so. And although those episodes were often pretty funny, like I really liked the episode where
Author. I mean, can we?
Yeah.
Could I just say one quick thing? So I agree with you. I think Seven's arc is amazing. I also loved the arc of the Doctor. I love the arc of B'Elanna. But just one quick thing about the humor, and this doesn't have to be a whole thing, but I think one of the reasons that I love Voyager the best so far of the other Star Trek is that it is so brilliantly written, just on the narrative and dialogue level on each episode. And one of the ways that it's brilliant, I think, is its sense of humor and often campiness, that is just, I think, somewhat, it feels to be a little rare for Star Trek. And the Doctor brings a lot of that out, but it comes out from all the characters.
The Doctor is very funny, but like Tuvok is also very funny.
He's very
funny.
Oh
yeah, he does have his moments, right?
Yeah, he's like he's a very dry sense of humor.
Where they think that he wrote a holo novel, but it was actually like a security
like a
kind
training
of thing.
exercise, but it like the crew thought it was actually supposed to be a novel, and then they all get like super into it.
It feels like an espionage thing. It's like all about like in the event of some people doing a
there's like a mutiny on the ship
against
and like
Janeway. Oh my god, it's such a funny episode. They're like, Tuvok, I didn't know you had aspirations to be a novelist. He's like, it's not a novel. But the whole show is just, I really appreciated its sense of humor about itself. Like, to me, that made it feel much more immersive and realistic and compelling. And then they were able to juxtapose moments of humor with these huge moments of pathos and real, you know, like high stakes kind of deeper questions and issues. So I just thought that was brilliant, whether it was humor with the Doctor or not. Or, you know,
did you want to talk specifically about author?
Yeah, but Benji sounded like he was.
Okay, sorry.
Benji,
go ahead.
One last thing about the Doctor, which I think is good, which I realized is like, yeah, to use a Doctor. What was I think kind of interesting with the Doctor is since the Doctor. First of all, it's interesting that a crew member is a hologram, but it wasn't even just that the Doctor was like a person, acting like a person. Like he was like a neurotic Doctor. Like he was like a neurotic person, and he knew he was a hologram, right? I mean, he like
he did.
He was totally aware. I mean, maybe that's what made him neurotic, but he kind of was this like worrying neurotic Doctor, you know, who like really had a personality of like only like I feel like, and it was pretty nuanced. It was like only personality that you could see a human has.
Robert Picardo, before the show, was already like, you know, well known as this character actor. He had already been in quite a few things, including some with hair. You know, beforehand, it was just sort of like like he was in like Gremlins 2, for example. If you ever go back and rewatch that one, for example. But the thing, like, as for me, I'm more of a fan of the other Doctor episode about changing history called Lying Witness. That's the one where he is really reactivated. Good. And let me read you a quote.
The World War II one?
No. I actually kind of. I will be honest.
But yes, yes, that episode is terrific.
Where there's like a backup copy of EMH that gets stuck on a planet.
And it's like 700 years in the future. Right?
Yes, that's right. And let me give you a quote from the episode from Memory Alpha here. When diplomacy fails, there's only one alternative: violence. Force must be applied without apology. It's the Starfleet way. And like, you know, and then, you know, like they had, it was all very different. Like you had Chakotay with an even bigger face tattoo, you know, which is like,
when we see like the evil versions of the crew, that was like the closest they came to a mirror episode.
Right, they never did.
It wasn't really the Mirror Universe, but it was almost like Mirror Universe Voyager.
Janeway with her black gloves and her like arsenal.
Right, they all have like black gloves and they're wearing like black eyeliner and stuff. It's
yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, these things are kind of interesting because, you know, I feel like in a lot of ways, you know, there was an aspect of his personality that you could call humanity that felt like, you know, pretty significant. I want to talk about one of the weird art. Yes.
Mira was about to ask about something. What were you gonna say before?
Oh, thank you. That's okay. I don't.
Before I talked about the Doctor.
Oh, just that I loved the episode author, and that it felt to me like kind of, you know, it was obviously a similar theme as that episode with Data in TNG, where it's a question of like, is Data
Measure of a Man? Yeah, I love that episode.
So I thought the author did, you know, it was like playing on the same theme, but in a really, I felt like it played out. It was executed better, which I know is going to be a controversial thing.
Very controversial.
Well,
I agree. I think author is better than Measure of a Man.
It's like a stunning episode. If you go back and watch it. But
so I want to talk about something which definitely is a mixed thing, which is the arc of Q over the course of Voyager. And
I know what you're going to say, Jeremy. But
I don't know if you even agree with me here. I think the first episode that Q shows up, which is about suicide.
Yes. Oh,
yeah, that episode's so good.
And about like assisted suicide, I think is very good. But then after that, they have something called the Q, you know, the Q and the Gray, which is like a Civil War thing. And I would call that kind of like a fun episode, but it makes no sense.
It does not
at all.
It doesn't make any sense, but yes.
It's so
and I also everything that Q is doing about trying to impregnate Janeway is just I think it's all pretty terrible. And I feel like it just none of that really fits with me. Like his whole infatuation with her, I didn't really like it. It just felt like they were like, well, we can't just do the Picard thing, so let's make it so he's hot for her. And I was like, oh, that's like, kind of reductive. I didn't like that. I remember at the time.
The later episode where he comes back with his son.
Oh, I hated that episode.
Oh, I loved
it.
That his son was such a monster. I just didn't. It was like.
But he learns empathy. I like.
Yes, I understand the point of the episode. I remember the episode, but where was his mom? Why wasn't his mom in that episode?
I mean, can you really ask that kind of question about Q? Like,
his mom should have been in the episode. It really bothered me. I remember he's like, yo, here's Q with my young Q, and he's a scamp, and his mother's off doing something, which is like because you couldn't get her for the episode, I guess, or did you not write her into the episode? I don't know which one it is, but I really didn't like that aspect of it. I just felt like this idea of like, well, now we're going to we expanded it, and I actually liked the Lady Q character who was also Q. Yeah, I felt like he's like, yeah, I can buy it. She's got the right personality to be like a match to him.
Yeah.
And the fact that we only saw her in like that one episode was really kind of infuriating. And it was a huge like letdown. It was like because like I said, I didn't really like Q in the Grave, but I still enjoyed it. So, and then it was just one of these things where it felt like it had more of a potential to be something that didn't get there. But I do remember when you were talking about the Nazi episode, and I will admit I did like it, even though it also is kind of stupid. But there is like a kind of excitement I got. I remember at the end of the episode when the Klingons come in and attack the Nazis. It's like, I don't know, how can you hate that?
Really, my only complaints about that episode is like when the Klingons come in to attack the Nazis. There should have been more Klingons. There was only like 3 of them. It should have been
clear,
like
yeah. Well, it was clear they spent most of the money on the on the set.
Right, but it is really. I love that episode.
Well, I did like how like the holodeck Nazi like sub guy, the sub commander, was so convincing that he convinced the other like Hirogen guy, to be like
the holodeck character, the program convinced.
He's like, yes,
Hirogen, like, yes, you're right. Nazism is correct.
Right. So I kind of like that one, but all right. So I think we're just about out of time here. I think it's sort of interesting, just to sort of like look back and thinking about like these things. Now, I will say, for me, Deep Space Nine is still the show that affects me the most, and and that in general has the most consistency of quality of episodes and characters that I like. I think TNG has the best individual episodes, but not the best quality at all. I think it has some really terrible ones, but there are some episodes that are really just so, like, either just like really interesting with time stuff or other sci-fi things, or just like emotionally powerful to me that I just really love them for TNG. And there's some stuff in Voyager that I think is pretty good. I just think there's nothing for me personally that ever hits like some of the heights of TNG. But that's like my own personal feeling. And I think guilty pleasures are part of all these things. Star Trek is kind of that kind of show. Sometimes it can be cheesy, it can be campy. And Deep Space Nine mainly did that with its Mirror Universe episodes.
Right.
I mean, I think so yeah. I guess one of my final things I'll say with it too is like, so my experience watching Voyager was kind of like so Jeremy, it was probably like you watching it first, and then probably like I think I just had it on the background. Like there was a period of time for like a year or so where I couldn't figure out on our like crappy like 1981 TV that we had in the basement where we played like Nintendo on.
Yep.
I think I couldn't figure out how to mess because you were probably in college at that point or something, Jeremy. But like I think I messed up like the audio video sort of stuff, so I could listen to shows while I was playing like Mario All Stars or something. So a lot of Voyager episodes happened in the background, and then somehow I did actually watch plenty of. Maybe it was like on after something, like probably when I was watching SmackDown. I feel like Voyager was on afterwards. So like I just ended up like
that sounds right.
I think often what happened is that I didn't intend to watch Voyager. except for the episode with the rock and the space rock bottom. But
Right.
but
Space rock bottom,
yeah,
man.
right. But the thing beyond that, I almost never tried to, but it was often like one of those shows like I somehow got like kind of pulled into it, and it like it at least made me think about things. I mean, like there was at least that. And then, as I said, with the episode with them being like in the darkness without the stars and stuff, I remember like I was kind of affected by that. I thought that had a good like impact. But my point is like, and what I was positing earlier about Voyager being like the last of that sort of Star Trek thing is, I think my main complaint, I probably said this before, and again, this is without having seen Discovery or the new Picard show and plenty of stuff, but at least this is how I felt when I saw the first two J.J. Abrams movies, which were fine. I think what they try to do sometimes to update Star Trek is they just go way too much into like let's make it like an action adventure and maybe do have some themes, but it's like I feel like it doesn't fit because I think the thing about Star Trek, which is interesting, is that Star Trek it always, I mean, in some sense you could say it's a little more boring than other Star action adventure things. It's not always an action adventure, but what it was kind of this like science fiction thing of like each episode or different stories would be the sort of exploration of the sort of themes that science fiction deals with: humanity, just what makes something human, and I mean tons and tons of different things about morality and whatnot. So I felt like Voyager still kept that going. Now again, it may have to do with the timing because it was kind of the end of that arc and that era of like episodic TV from the 90s sort of thing. But like I haven't seen that sort of thing in Star Trek afterwards. Like I felt like when we talked about, even though Star Wars and Star Trek is kind of a false dichotomy comparison, at least I felt like Rogue One, for instance, was a good updating of Star Wars, while still keeping the feel of Star Wars in a certain sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if Star Trek has kept it. Again, this is without having seen plenty of this stuff since Voyager, but I felt like Voyager still kept that because again, we were talking about the Tuvix episode and plenty of these things. Do we still have that in Star Trek? Maybe it's there, and you guys can tell me that's the case. But I felt like Voyager still kept that going, while I feel like they still kept, it still had its like Star Trek integrity there.
Yeah.
My closing.
I very much agree with that. And as much as I enjoyed Picard, I think you're spot on. Like I don't think Picard does the same thing. It's not structured narratively the same way that the classic Star Trek, and TNG and Voyager are. And I think that there's something really valuable and powerful about a framework of a sci-fi story that is not simply an action and adventure kind of thing, but that is like taking place in a utopian future, and that is like taking hard looks at philosophical, sociological, moral, those kinds of questions. One thing I loved about Voyager is that a lot of the episodes deal with spiritual and religious questions, which otherwise I think is pretty. I just that felt kind of rare. I mean, I know DS9 touches on that stuff too, but I thought those episodes were really brilliant, and also I loved that there were so many awesome women in Voyager, not just Janeway. You have B'Elanna, you have Seven. I mean, just the fact that they're not just like kick-ass in the sense of, oh, they can win in a fight, but meaning they have full-fledged personalities. I love that B'Elanna is an engineer and is so amazing at that. I watched this as an adult. I can only imagine the impact that this would have had on me if I had watched it as a kid. And I think there's, like, Benji, what you were saying about kind of the, recent Star Trek and how they've been doing it, it feels almost like there's a lack of trust in audiences that they will be along for the ride if it's not, like, super action-y, adventure-y. And I've introduced a bunch of my friends to Voyager, like, in just, this year, last year, and it really holds up and people get super into it. Like, I think that it trusts its audience a lot, and it has really strong writing, and really compelling characters. And I just appreciate that. So and it passes the Bechdel test, basically. Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. Sam,
right.
do you have anything else to say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm already on record as having said that Voyager is my favorite Star Trek series. with the caveat that I haven't seen all of DS9, but I don't think. I mean, like, whatever. I know a lot. DS9 has its fans, Jeremy among them, but Voyager is actually my favorite Star Trek series, and it's the me of 5 years ago would have found that a very bizarre thing to say, but it's true. The only other thing that I want to mention is just specifically, I mean, we haven't talked about B'Elanna Torres a lot. I mean, Mira was just talking about her a little bit, but she's a very underrated character. I feel like most casual Star Trek fans, like when they think of Voyager, they think of Janeway, they think of Seven, maybe they think of the Doctor, but like B'Elanna Torres is a terrific character, and she's really interesting, and there's so many good episodes with her, or like even episodes that aren't really about her, but like that she has like such a fun role in, or like just a compelling role, and I really think she's very underappreciated. So just want to put that out there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a good running around of everything. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. And thanks, everybody, for coming out to the exciting world of Voyager, which is definitely, something of mixed interest to a lot of people. So I will say, nerd you later, guys.
Nerd you later.
Yeah, nerd you later.
Nerd you later.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was so fun.
Of course. Welcome. You're always welcome on the podcast that I am welcome on.
Indeed.